when you look at the numbers, around 70% of patients actually fail to complete a cycle of chemoradiation treatment in palliative care as well because of those side effects. So the world has changed a lot in terms of its kind of receptiveness to pulsed electric fields, and we've seen such amazing results in the cardiac ablation space. It sounds amazing, doesn't it? Being able to selectively target disease cells and leave healthy tissues intact. And I think that's been one of the big challenges that we've had as a company with the technologies. It sounds too good to be true.
Welcome back to another episode of the GS MedTech podcast, where I speak with industry leaders shaping the future of MedTech. I'm Dame Medarsky, and today we're discussing non-thermal ablation using pulsed electric fields. Why non-thermal ablation is gaining traction now, what it takes to move a novel platform from concept to CE mark and actual real-world use, and how you scale an interventional platform technology. On the back of some very good news from King's College Hospital after successfully treating their 100th patient with endoscopic electroporation yesterday, I'm honored to welcome Declan Soden, CEO of Mirai Medical, to the podcast. Declan, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, pleasure to be on with you, Dowie. Thanks for the invitation. Delighted to be here.
Amazing. So you and I know each other for maybe about almost 4 years now, and it's been amazing to follow your technology development and business projection as well. And I know you've been in PEF for quite a while and working on electroporation innovation. But maybe for the audience, you can just give us a brief overview of your background.
Yeah, sure. So my background, I have a PhD in genetics, gene therapy actually originally, and began working in the field of cancer research in Cork, at Cork University Hospital, the Mercy University Hospital here in Ireland, over 20 years ago. And that actual experience led to my kind of involvement in the development of pulsed electric fields or electroporation over a long period of time and the kind of clinical translation of that. That work then ultimately led to setting up Mirai Medical as a spin out from the university in Cork and the hospitals there, and kind of led to us establishing the company. So we actually set it up in Galway in Ireland, in the west of Ireland, where there's a kind of such a strong base of medical device companies. A lot of kind of the multinationals are based there, but there's a great ecosystem for medical device technologies, great supply chain of people with a lot of experience as well. So yeah, we're based here in Ireland and working hard to kind of address a number of large unmet clinical needs with the specific focus on the gastrointestinal tract and using pulsed electric fields to help us to kind of make treatments safer and more effective for doctors and for the patients primarily.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And maybe you've obviously already touched upon what you're developing, but maybe on what problem you're trying to solve and why now?
Yeah, so I mean, I suppose kind of being very simple about it, the problem that we're working to solve is to be able to kind of safely ablate diseased tissue, I suppose you've put it that. When you think ablation is the removal of tissue, the kind of simple term of it. And we have solutions for that. When we think of surgery, that's surgical resection. When we think of radiation, that's ionizing radiation, kind of destroying the area and ablating it. Or there's other ablation technologies that are cooking, heating the tissue or freezing the tissue. They're all ablation solutions that are used within the gastrointestinal tract, but they come with challenges. They come with kind of potential risk to the patient in terms of side effects and damage to surrounding healthy tissue tract. So kind of coming up with how do we address that particular problem? How do we kind of deliver ablation in a safer and more efficient way really has been the kind of problem that we've been working to address.
And you've already touched upon it, but maybe elaborating a little bit more. Where is the pain clinically? Is it incomplete resection, recurrence, complications?
Yeah, and I suppose when you kind of look at the pain, yeah, it's the kind of complications and the risk profile of the current technologies really. I guess when you look at the kind of the unmet clinical need, I guess specifically you would look at patients with later stage disease who are fragile and are unsuited for kind of standard of care treatments. That really is the kind of the big pain point is how do we kind of deliver a simple endoscopy procedure to kind of deal with removing this diseased tissue in an efficient manner and a safe manner like that. There's quite a wide range of unmet clinical needs within the GI tract where that's particularly important.
Yeah, and obviously an unmet need, but I'm assuming currently there are some treatments existing as well. And what are the options that patients are having at the moment?
Yeah, I guess specifically when you kind of dial in on it, we look at kind of colorectal cancer, and that kind of breaks down into maybe three categories of or groupings of it. There's the kind of earlier stage disease where surgery or endoscopic surgery is utilized. There's patients where the disease has progressed a little bit further, and where kind of standard of care is surgery in combination with kind of new molecular treatments, or chemotherapy and radiotherapy treatment. And then there's a group of patients at the end where patients are living longer now with cancer, thanks to the advances that are being made. But how do we manage those patients at the end in the kind of palliative kind of stage of the disease, which affects 20-25% of patients. There's also the patients that are elderly and fragile who might have earlier stage disease but really aren't suited for kind of standard of care treatments. And so when you kind of look at the pain point there, kind of particularly kind of the patients at towards the end of, kind of running into palliative care, radiotherapy and palliative chemoradiation treatment is the kind of standard of care, or stenting. But they all come with significant drawbacks. Stenting can cause a lot of discomfort and pain for the patient. Radiotherapy treatment causes a significant number of adverse events, can damage surrounding healthy tissue structures, can cause radiation proctitis, and longer term bleeding in those patients. So these are kind of well understood kind of side effects that happen in patients with cancer. And, and also when you look at the numbers, around 70% of patients actually fail to complete a cycle of chemoradiation treatment in palliative care as well because of those side effects. So that's kind of really the pain point that we felt was the right one to address with our technology as the kind of landing point with the system to demonstrate that we could improve the outcomes for these patients, that there was a better solution that could be used to improve their quality of life.
And obviously the burden on patients is very evident. And you've mentioned the complications, which I'm assuming those complications are putting burden on hospitals as well. Length of stay, procedure times, are those all burdens that you're trying to address as well?
Yeah, correct, exactly. So, when patients have these adverse events, they would typically require rehospitalization. They would require blood transfusions, for instance, particularly in the patients that develop radiation proctitis, or the side effects from radiotherapy treatment, all cause a huge burden on the healthcare system. And that's fundamentally where we're looking at this kind of pain point within the system, is that we can help to kind of alleviate those issues, deliver a better outcome for the patient in terms of their overall quality of life, address those challenges, and at the same time to remove that burden on the healthcare system of these kind of complications that typically arise with the current kind of options that are available.
And my experience, you phrase it a little bit different, ablation being removal of tissue, but my experience is usually that for many people, ablation equals heat. And how is electroporation fundamentally different from thermal ablation in clinical outcomes and safety?
Sure. So, exactly kind of ablation, heating, cauterizing, cooking the tissue, has been used very successfully in ablating tumors. You have to be very careful how it's applied because it'll destroy surrounding nerve structures, vascular structures. It's indiscriminate. And so any kind of traditional older ablation method, be it heat, but through heat or cooling or ionizing radiation, are indiscriminate in terms of the damage they cause and have to be carefully positioned and targeted to the diseased area. What's different about electroporation essentially is that we're destabilizing the cell membrane. So it's an entirely different mechanism of action. You are using energy, but you're delivering these pulses of creating these electrical fields that destabilize the cell membrane. And there's different thresholds depending on the type of tissue. Different cell types are more sensitive. And actually, as it happens, cancer cells are a bit more selective and easier to stress out from this treatment. Critically important, you're not destroying nerve structures, muscular structures in the surrounding areas. So it allows you to be a little bit more indiscriminate, perhaps, in terms of how you deliver the energy. So you can be a bit more aggressive in the application around the margins. You're quite happy to treat healthy tissue in the margins, in the knowledge that you cause tissue regeneration as opposed to complete obliteration of the area and damage and the side effects that potentially could cause. So yeah, it's a very different mechanism of action that's involving kind of disrupting the cell membrane, causing a stress on those cells and triggering cell death in the kind of days after the procedure. And, the biggest difference really when you look at it is the fact that those healthy tissue structures are preserved. And I suppose it kind of it sounds amazing, doesn't it? Being able to selectively target disease cells and
Yeah.
leave healthy tissues intact. And I think that's been one of the big challenges that we've had as a company with the technologies. It sounds too good to be true. But it sounds like quite a claim to make that you can do that. And I suppose what's probably changed an awful lot in the last couple of years, we can be very thankful, is to the companies in the cardiac ablation space who've taken this technology and are now utilizing it in a very large way to as a treatment for cardiac arrhythmias. And so historically, radiofrequency ablation or cryoablation were utilized to do those treatments.
Mm.
Whereas now there's been a very rapid transition over to using pulsed electric fields, pulse field ablation, because they've been showing that there's a reduced risk of causing damage to the esophagus in particular, when that energy kind of leaks beyond the area that you're looking to treat. So that's the argument we've been making for many years, is that pulse electric fields can be used safely in the GI tract. You're not going to kind of destroy the esophagus or the colon, that we can treat transmurally with the technology and do so safely. So we're very grateful to all the efforts that have gone on in the cardiac ablation space, because it helps with credibility of the technology. I think clinicians now think of it very differently, are kind of much more receptive and open to this idea of delivering electricity into tissue within the GI tract. Yeah, it's different approach to treating tissue, and one that we're very excited about in terms of the benefits it can bring to patients and to the healthcare system in general.
Awesome, thank you. And your therapy is delivered endoscopically, and maybe you can touch upon why is that important, both from a clinical perspective, but also from a commercial perspective, I'm assuming as well.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, how do you deliver the energy in there? And being able to do it endoscopically, being able to use a device attached to an endoscope, or a device that can be delivered through the working channel of the endoscope, is very important, because obviously that ultimately allows you to deliver a treatment in an outpatient type setting. It allows the patients to go home the same day. And I suppose that's the kind of the way medicine is evolving, isn't it? Kind of over the last 50 years, we've gone from procedures that require big scars or big surgical intervention to kind of less and less invasive approaches. And obviously endoscopic, if you can deliver a therapy endoscopically, it can be delivered in a very simple and safe manner on an endoscope, without needing to open up the patient. So it's the ultimate goal then, is a kind of an outpatient treatment delivered under kind of endoscopy sedation, where the patient can come in the morning and go home at lunchtime. So that's better for the patient. It's better for the healthcare system, because that patient isn't taking up bedtime or requiring kind of care after the procedure. Reduces the risk of side effects and infections and so on post procedure as well. So yeah, I mean that's obviously the benefit of doing things endoscopically and not requiring to open up the patient to deliver a treatment.
And is that one of your USPs, one of your positive difference compared to maybe other ablation modalities in GI?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of probably the really valuable piece we have is how we deliver pulse electric fields. So we're kind of building on 20 years of experience with the technology. We've learned some important lessons along the way in the preclinical and clinical context. We were the first company in the world to deliver pulsed electric fields in the GI tract in the clinical studies we did. So I think kind of really how you deliver that energy is really, really important. But to do so safely and to do so in a way that's efficient and effective is you can develop different catheters to deliver the energy in different approaches, whether you're doing it focally or circumferentially. But kind of how that energy is delivered is really, really key to a successful outcome for the patient.
And I've mentioned the good news from yesterday in terms of the 100 patients being treated at King's College Hospital. But maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. Where are you today clinically? What studies have been completed? What's going on in terms of the clinical evidence?
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, very grateful to the team at King's, led by Mr. Amin Haji, to kind of really drive this forward at King's in particular. And so, I guess we did a number of clinical studies initially. We did 7 small scale kind of medical device, kind of typical small kind of phase 1, phase 2 clinical studies in collaboration with hospitals in Ireland and in Denmark. And we demonstrated that it was safe and effective. But really, what we were kind of looking to try and do is kind of progress beyond those kind of small scale studies and demonstrate in a larger group of patients that all the things we've just been talking about are true and correct. And what's been fantastic with Mr. Haji's support has been the kind of the rollout of this in a pilot commercial launch at King's College, been able to kind of demonstrate that, again, the things we've just talked about, that there are kind of 20% or so of patients with palliative need, and been able to showcase that this is effective, that we can improve their quality. So they've published a number of studies now in terms of following up on their patients. And I think the really important thing that we've seen is just that communication within the trust and kind of spreading that news and kind of educating people that this solution is there and that it's available has been really important. We're only a small company. We don't have a huge, big marketing budget. So, kind of being able to kind of spread that information in an environment that's very noisy. I think clinicians are overloaded with information, new clinical studies, particularly in the cancer setting. There's just too much kind of coming. They're overworked, and there's a huge burden on them to be able to kind of keep up to speed. And so that can be a challenge for a company like Mirai Medical. You've got, like I say, you've got this exciting technology that can have a huge positive impact on patients, but trying to get beyond that or, create awareness of the technology is challenging. And so I think to get to the point in one hospital site where they're paying for the tech, they're buying the disposables and they're delivering the treatment, and they've now kind of got to that kind of key milestone of kind of, 100 cases done. And I think what's critically important is the registry of data that they've been collecting. You can do small scale clinical studies, but creating a real world registry and capturing the evidence and the data. And I think what's really remarkable from their data is, and this isn't, yes, it's not company data. This is data that they're collecting themselves. Has been no adverse events in those procedures. So no rehospitalizations, no serious adverse events, no adverse events, full stop. And if you were to compare that to if that group of patients had, for instance, radiotherapy treatment as their palliation, there would have been very significant grade 2, grade 3 kind of adverse events expected. It's kind of part of what happens when you deliver kind of invasive treatments, and you think of the kind of the longer term side effects that those treatments cause on those patients that we don't see with endoscopic electroporation is really, really exciting. So, we're very optimistic that we're kind of at a tipping point with the technology, in thanks to the help from the clinicians that have kind of helped with the clinical studies to date, and with Mr. Haji and the team at King's to be able to really progress this forward. Because, the landing part has been in the kind of palliative setting, but in reality, pulse field ablation has applications across the entire spectrum of the disease, from early stage to late stage. But really kind of demonstrating the safety and efficacy in this difficult group of patients has been really important. And to do so without causing side effects or rehospitalization in the patients is hugely important. They've also completed a business case there as well, showing the significant cost savings that comes with that. And obviously that's very important in this day and age. You're not developing technologies that are going to put this huge burden on the healthcare system. So, it does meet that really important criteria of actually you're reducing the burden by the fact that you're avoiding kind of side effects in particular, is something we're very proud of as a company.
And I've seen the device, and obviously it's impressively small in terms of the size of the footprint. And I'm assuming from a clinical adoption barriers perspective, equipment footprint is not an issue. But are you facing some other clinical adoption barriers that maybe are evident at this point?
Yeah, I suppose the biggest barrier to adoption, particularly in the kind of cancer setting, is the amount of evidence and data that you need. They kind of are dealing with a multidisciplinary team, so surgeons, oncologists, radiologists, interventional endoscopists. So, particularly the oncologists who are primarily responsible for patients with kind of either middle or later stage disease and managing their symptoms. The sort of clinical evidence that they typically require is quite extensive, randomized controlled trials, 5-year follow-up. Studies that typically cost millions and millions of euros to conduct and carry out, which is what oncologists are typically aware of. So, you come across a degree of skepticism when you make the claims that we've made about the technology, and when you've kind of done only smaller scale studies, they're a harder group to kind of know over. And like I say, there's a huge burden on them as well in terms of kind of the information of all the clinical studies that are being done globally, and that they're constantly being hit with. And, it is a kind of challenging group of clinicians to try and kind of educate and make them aware of the technology. But like I say, I think, we're kind of at a tipping point with it now. When you can kind of point to this quantum of data coming from King's, it gives greater credibility to the fact that this is a safe and effective technology. Yeah, but I think that's the biggest, cancer can be a slow moving space, certainly is a slow moving space, and you need high quality clinical evidence to convince the oncologists and the surgeons and the other clinicians involved that this is an appropriate technology. But I think we're kind of at a breaking point with the data coming from King's now to help us with the kind of wider adoption of the technology.
And if you're looking at the early clinical use and utilizing the device, are you able to share any learnings that maybe you found that have either impacted or influenced the strategical direction of the business or development of the company?
Yeah, sure. I guess I could think of a negative and a positive, kind of in terms of early lessons learned from using pulsed electric fields in the GI tract. I suppose the negative, really, in the early clinical studies we did was the kind of muscular contractions that were induced. So, that required the use of general anesthesia. But what we hadn't anticipated is that those muscular contractions would cause some degree of pain and discomfort for the patients post-procedure. So that was obviously something we needed to address, and we've done so with the ePort generator. So we kind of focused on developing a high-frequency biphasic pulse. And essentially what that means is that you can overcome the muscular contraction. So you deliver the pulses at such a high frequency, the nerves become depolarized and they don't respond. So you don't get the patient responding to, the fact that you're delivering a voltage into tissue and you're delivering it for a period of time. You want to kind of overcome those muscular contractions. So thankfully we've been able to do that, and that's been able to mean that we can deliver the treatment. We can deliver the treatment through endoscopy sedation now. In an outpatient type setting, we don't require the use of general anesthesia. But that was an important lesson to learn, and that's obviously why you do small scale clinical studies to begin with. In terms of positive, unexpected maybe would be kind of on occasion we've seen patients have complete response. So patients with later stage disease having complete responses. So we're only treating kind of a portion of their disease with the treatment. And yet when they're followed up, it's all responded, and secondaries that they've had have responded as well. So it speaks to a very important element of the treatment as well, which goes back to my early experience in cancer research, is that the degree of immune cell infiltration, the immune response in general, is responsible ultimately for curative outcomes in patients. So kind of understanding that, how we can kind of help to facilitate that immune engagement would be kind of the next step beyond kind of palliation into kind of patient delivering treatment to patients as a neoadjuvant treatment. We were fortunate to get a non-dilutive grant early or kind of late 2025, Disruptive Technologies Innovation Fund, which is helping us in collaboration with St. James's Hospital in Dublin to advance the technology forward into kind of earlier stage disease and look at ways in which we can kind of convert these cold tumors or tumors that aren't immunologically responsive and make them more responsive potentially to kind of immunotherapy treatment. So that's a very exciting area for the future. But we have seen it anecdotally in some patients, unexpected kind of responses like that, which is surprising and quite incredible.
Amazing. And speaking about positives and maybe future outlooks, what does success look like in the next 12 to 24 months from a clinical evidence perspective?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose we're planning the continued rollout of our kind of real world registry. So that's really the key, is kind of generating kind of real world evidence on the benefits of the system and the cost savings associated with it as well. So over the kind of next year or two, we would plan to see a kind of expanded rollout of that across the NHS, kind of their key cancer network. That's something that, our focus strategically is to kind of focus in on the UK, the NHS as a key center for us right now, in terms of being able to prove the technology out. Obviously, beyond that, then we would plan to submit to the FDA. We're going to go for a 510(k) later this year with the current platform, and so hopefully all going well, then kind of towards the end of 2026, we will be kind of approved to treat patients in the US market as well, and then kind of work with a couple of key centers there that are very enthusiastic. So there's been a really good response from US hospitals and key kind of cancer centers in the US to use the technology. So we're working really hard to try and kind of make that happen in the next year or two, so that we can kind of begin treating patients on the other side of the Atlantic.
Yeah. And it's always amazing to me that, obviously, I'm assuming for a CEO and a person that's wanting to develop this company, it's important to cover as many markets as possible. But how do you see, being a CE marked business, that naturally nowadays you progress on to thinking about regulatory pathways in the US as well? How does that influence your decision making process in terms of running the business day to day?
Yeah, so I mean, look, yeah, the whole the CE approval, the regulatory environment in Europe, I think, look, as everybody in the medical device space knows, has become incredibly much more challenging to get MDR. There's such a long time frame, and I know a lot of companies now are looking to kind of go FDA first and then kind of come back and see will they kind of go for MDR approval. But I suppose what's really key, at least in our minds, has been able to demonstrate the stickiness of the technologies, the fact that hospitals are willing to pay for the system, the fact that we can generate revenue, but do it in a very focused way. Ultimately, we're set up as a company to kind of do the R&D, do the clinical, do the early commercial. We're not a big, huge commercial company with a huge sales force out there pushing this. And neither should we. We know what we're really good at, which is just demonstrating, building high quality clinical evidence, demonstrating the value to patients, and getting that kind of an early clinical adoption moving and kind of demonstrating the growth at a number of key centers. So, like I said earlier, we were kind of focused on the NHS and focused on kind of key cancer centers there, which just makes sense for us geographically being next door to the United Kingdom, and it's kind of easier access for us. But beyond that, then obviously the largest med device market in the world is the US, and that's the kind of next natural development for us as a company, is to kind of work with some of the key centers there, replicate what we've seen in Europe and the UK, and demonstrate it in the US as well.
And you've mentioned the clinical champions here in the UK. You've mentioned the hospital economics to a degree, why this is beneficial. Regulatory you're covering. How is the reimbursement covered for the treatment?
Yeah, so for kind of a lot of these kind of cancer treatments, there's a kind of high tariff code that's available. It's a much kind of maybe more straightforward early adoption, really, that kind of the pricing really doesn't specifically come into it. Where that becomes more challenging is kind of the longer term, as you kind of get greater growth and adoption of the technology. Certainly having a specific reimbursement code is available. It's a kind of scenario where the pricing for it is less of a challenge initially, and it's the same in the US market as well. The kind of hospitals have a discretionary budget available for them for kind of treatments such as this. But then what's really key is to use that real world registry to develop that high quality data to demonstrate the cost savings, so that ultimately in time, and it does take time obviously to get specific reimbursement coding in place. But that's the strategy, or that's the kind of focus we have, is kind of build that high quality evidence, and then in time get into the guidelines, get the specific coding available, so that it can kind of support a wider adoption across the entire kind of hospital network in and beyond, kind of maybe just the tertiary hospitals, into kind of a broader grouping of hospitals as well.
Amazing. And obviously going on to a different market, I'm assuming your initial go-to-market strategy learnings from the UK and the NHS system to a degree will be applied to the US as well. But have you started developing centers of excellence in the US, some key opinion leaders? And obviously, are you thinking already in terms of distributors or direct sales channels?
Sure, yeah. So I mean, yeah, what's been really positive has been we've been approached by a lot of KOLs in the US in the kind of interventional endoscopy space who've been very keen, who've read the publications and the data coming from Europe with the technology, and have been very keen to use it in their patients. Have been very frustrating maybe not to be able to kind of progress forward as quickly as we'd like with an FDA submission. But ultimately it's the same principle, isn't it, in the US as it is kind of in the NHS or in Europe. It is about building high quality evidence, demonstrating that the claims are valid, and obviously working with kind of respected key opinion leaders in the cancer setting to help us to do that, and then to kind of roll it out in a very focused way at those key centers. So yeah, we would plan to take the lessons learned from the European and UK markets with the kind of initial rollout of the technology, and apply that into the US market then in time, once we kind of get the necessary FDA approval in place.
And prior to starting the recording of the podcast, we caught up in terms of how money efficient you have been in terms of developing the business so far, and the fundraising campaign that you've been running today. But maybe it's beneficial to touch upon future plans of fundraising as well.
Yeah, so we've been very fortunate in Ireland to have an amazing kind of MedTech angel network and investors. So we actually we did our first seed round in 2018, and we've raised 15 million euros since then from MedTech syndicates in Ireland, and Enterprise Ireland, the Western Development Commission, and just kind of MedTech investors. So we've been very fortunate to have such a supportive group of investors to allow us to kind of raise those funds. We've also then kind of secured about the same amount in terms of non-dilutive grant funding as well in that time frame, which has been fantastic. So kind of our plan is to raise the Series A towards the end of this year of around 20 million euros to support the US market rollout. We're conscious we've been able to keep our burn and our efficiency high in the kind of Irish context. We've been, have some fantastic kind of subcontractors in Ireland in terms of kind of the technology, the generator and the devices. So we've kind of very good low cogs, but we're conscious once you start looking at the US market and looking at kind of rolling it out into hospitals there, kind of it jumps up a level in terms of the kind of funds needed. So the plan would be to kind of close out a Series A towards the end of this year, which should support that kind of US market rollout in 2027 and beyond.
It's incredible to be supported with, obviously, from within the Irish community and the MedTech community within Ireland. And at the same time, we touched upon the non-dilutive funding as well, which usually plays a very important part in building a business. And obviously, have this 7.2 million from DTIF. Maybe just a little bit more elaboration in terms of what does the Pioneer program does and what helps with in terms of the development of the business directly.
Yeah, so this kind of more recent grant, what it's supporting really is the kind of the migration or the evolution of the technology from kind of the palliative setting into kind of as a neoadjuvant treatment in combination with standard of care. So kind of working with St. James's Hospital in Dublin, the plan is to run a clinical study in patients with kind of earlier stage disease and demonstrate these kind of immunological responses that we talked about and been able to kind of show that we can maybe encourage a better response to immunotherapies if we deliver pulsed electric fields to these tumor kind of at an earlier stage of treatment. So really what the Pioneer grant, this non-dilutive grant, is kind of helping with the preclinical and the clinical work, allowing us to kind of establish that our platform can be used kind of not just for palliating patients or that group of patients at kind of at the end stage of the disease, but can be positioned into an earlier setting whereby we can kind of demonstrate kind of a more favorable immunological environment being created with the technology. And ultimately the goal then of having more cures for patients, having more patients have a better curative outcome with less side effects. And, sadly, in the world as it is right now, more and more patients are developing colorectal cancer at a younger age, and it tends to be more aggressive. But it's where kind of organ preservation is really important because these patients could be living with the disease for 10 years, 20 years, and so on. So being able to kind of preserve healthy tissue structures becomes more and more important. So yeah, we're very excited about this new grant and kind of what it hopefully will allow us to leverage the experience to date and apply it into kind of patients with kind of earlier stage disease and kind of in a younger cohort of patients.
And maybe to close this chapter, one last question around manufacturing and scaling your manufacturing. Have you already started planning in terms of ramping up the need for a numerous number of devices?
Yeah, so we're kind of, again, very fortunate that current sub contractors that are manufacturing the systems for us here in Ireland have quite a lot of flex. So it's a kind of system we can turn on and off, which really suits us as a small company. We're just less than 20 staff right now. Allows us to keep our burn rate low and manageable. But those manufacturers have the capacity to scale higher. So they can kind of go from low scale volume to higher scale volume. They can produce under FDA whatever is required for the Europe or the US. So yeah, kind of we're in a good place like that. I think we're kind of geographically in a really good location in Europe and in the world to be able to kind of develop an innovative medical device technology and have very supportive companies nearby and also great people as well, because ultimately I think the success of any company is down to the people that you hire and that you bring in. And I would say that, yeah, we're very fortunate in Mirai Medical to have fantastic team of people covering the complete spectrum from regulatory, manufacturing, regulatory, preclinical, clinical, kind of early commercialization. So we're kind of fortunate to have a fantastic team to help us to kind of execute on the plan. I think that's ultimately why we've been able to kind of progress it to where we have today is having such fantastic people around to help us move it forward.
I couldn't agree more, Declan. I think in my opinion, obviously, every single medtech business that's being built out there needs three main components. That's obviously the idea and the generation of what you're building. And then you need people and money to support that. But people is definitely one of the key components that makes this happen.
Yeah, for sure.
And talking about people, maybe touching upon future hires and once you're planning out your commercialization scale? What does that look like from a talent perspective?
Yeah, I think, obviously looking at the US market as our next big challenge, I think kind of bringing in people with US commercialization experience really would be key. So, we would still plan to kind of focus in the same way we have. It's not just a big kind of commercial rollout where you're trying to kind of launch into as many different cancer centers or any
Yeah.
different hospitals as you can all in one go. The kind of plan really will be to demonstrate the kind of stickiness of the technology, demonstrate that we can kind of scale in a focused way at key hospitals and demonstrate that the kind of market is there and exists and people are willing to pay for. But, I think, yeah, bringing kind of US commercial experience really is probably the next big key step for us in terms of key hires. We're fortunate we can kind of expand out the company within Ireland in terms of what's needed as we grow, but definitely bringing on that kind of US based experience will be the next big hire for us.
And looking forward, if we fast forward, let's say 5 to 10 years, what does Mirai Medical look like?
Yeah, I think we're kind of at an exciting juncture in time. Like I said at the start of the podcast, the world has changed a lot in terms of its kind of receptiveness to pulsed electric fields, and we've seen such amazing results in the cardiac ablation space. And there's many companies now kind of looking at this and applying it into quite a wide range of indications. But I think for us as a company, we have a platform that has developed the use of pulsed electric fields within the GI tract. We see kind of a large number of unmet clinical needs across GI cancers and other indications beyond that. So I think success for us over the next 5 years would be building that high quality clinical evidence, demonstrating the value that this technology brings. And nothing feels better than that seeing people paying for your technology and seeing commercial growth and stickiness at key centers, because that's ultimately what we're telling our investors is the opportunity. So it's really nice to see that translation into kind of real world application. To take a company from kind of preclinical to actually 100 cases like we talked about being done at King's is hugely rewarding. And, we want that to become 1,000 cases, 10,000 cases, and so on. We want to see more hospitals in the UK and Europe using the technology, and then into the US and in Australia, the rest of the world as well. So it's an exciting time. And I think, pulsed electric fields are going to transform a lot of indications, not just in the GI tract over the next 10 years. And we're excited to be kind of part of that journey as a company.
So that's very good. Maybe one specific question on misconception, if you've come across some about GI cancer treatment in particular, that clinicians or investors should be aware of or should understand better.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think clinicians and investors know an awful lot more about some of this stuff than I do. I'm not sure I'd be telling them what misconceptions are there. But I think, look, a real concern more for investors is the time frame involved to kind of an exit, or the time frame involved to build clinical traction. And, these are some of the issues we've kind of spoken about in the last kind of as part of this call. It takes time to build clinical evidence. At times it takes time to build traction, and none more so in the cancer setting. It's a very kind of conservative setting, and for good reasons too. You need good quality clinical evidence before you can go and kind of scale this technology and apply it to a broader group of patients. But I think the misconception maybe is more the benefit that pulsed electric fields and how transformative maybe that this technology can be in the GI space and beyond. Because like when we talk about the differences we see with our experience, the fact that we don't get any adverse events at all relative to if you were comparing this to radiotherapy treatment and the kind of the side effects and complications that would occur, it's night and day. And I think the adoption rate will grow steadily and faster based on the fact that this is a far safer, effective treatment, which doesn't cause complications or side effects to any degree of what kind of current options that are available out there. So, we're excited to be part of that, excited to be proving that that's the case. And, hopeful for the next few years that we can kind of grow that beyond into the US market and into key hospitals around the world, and kind of place our platform there so they can address all these unmet clinical needs. And yeah, it's fortunate to be part of that journey.
And for me, it's been amazing to follow your progress over the last 4 years, to be honest. And I keep
Thanks.
an eye on any updates, and I gladly reshare any updates that I see that are actually just confirming what you're aiming to achieve as well. And throughout those years, I'm sure, no doubt, you have gathered much experience that maybe as a last closing question you can address. What advice would you give to other early medtech founders building in this space?
I suppose, yeah. Yeah, there's lots of, I'm sure there's lots of kind of war stories and, there's kind of the unanticipated problems that can arise. I kind of mentioned some of the negatives that, from our early clinical experience. But I don't know. I think the most important advice I would give to anybody involved in the medtech space is such a hard, challenging field, that really it's about the team that you bring in around you, your investors, your board, the people in the company. That's ultimately the key. You can address any problem, an unexpected challenge that comes up if you have a really solid team around you. And certainly, I think the key to our success has been the team that we have, has been able to address those challenges and been able to kind of see the problem, come up with the solution, and progress things forward. So, I think that's, I think medtech, it has been a very challenging space over the last number of years. The kind of the environment, fundraising has been difficult, but, having a really good team around you is ultimately, if you don't have that, I don't think you'll get very far at all.
I love that. I think it's a very solid, sound advice. Declan, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me, and we'll keep in touch.